Graham Simmons presenting, and Graham has worked for Wilderness Safaris in Southern Africa for the last 9 years. He started off as a camp manager in Botswana, and he's now in sales based out of Victoria Falls. Born in Zimbabwe and having lived much of his life there, Graham has always been passionate about giving back to the country that's finally on the rise again after a major dip in tourism numbers. And hopefully it's back on track once more to becoming one of Africa's most sought-after safari destinations. So I'm Sally, and I will field some questions from you at the end. If anyone has any questions, you just type them into your message box on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. This way, Graham can then just present, and then at the end, I will read out the questions to Graham, and then he can answer them so that anyone who's not here at the live version can hear them. A recording of the webinar will also be available on our website after this, and it will be emailed to all of you as well. Graham, over to you.
Hi, Sally. Thanks very much. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining me on this webinar about Zimbabwe, a world of wonders. As Sally says, I do work for Wilderness Safaris, but today I'm going to be wearing my Zimbabwe flag and taking off the Wilderness Safaris cap for a little bit. After all, I was born a Zimbabwean first, and the one thing that has kept Zimbabwe going throughout some of its troubled times has been tourism. So hopefully I can present to you on why Zimbabwe is a world of wonders and a great place to visit, and we'll take questions afterwards. All right, so just looking at the positioning of Zimbabwe quickly to go over the basics. It is a landlocked country. Depending on who you're using as a source, it stands at 13.7 million people. We have English as the official language, and then Shona and Ndebele as the two main vernaculars. It's a nice 2 hours ahead of GMT only, and we are strategically positioned in the tourism zone because we've got Zambia to the north, Botswana to the west, Mozambique to the east, and South Africa to the south. Zimbabwe is an easy country to access. There are certain visas for certain countries. So, for example, most of the SADC region would not need a visa, but some of those that can get visas at the port of entry would be our European guests, as well as the US guests, Australian guests, and Canadians. There is a website I can direct you to assist you with finding out who needs a visa and who doesn't. And there are different visas that are available. So a single entry visa can range from $30 up to $60, depending on the country that you're coming from, or your guests are coming from. And a double entry ranges from $45 up to $100. There is a new CASA visa, which I'm sure many of you are able to or have heard about. What the CASA visa does, it's a visa that is reciprocal between Zimbabwe and Zambia. So upon arrival, you can pay $50, and for a full month, you can travel in and out of Zimbabwe and Zambia as many times as you like. That is only for people who can get a visa at port of entry. The CASA visa is not applicable to those nationalities that need a visa in advance. So the tricky reason I'm harping on a little bit about this visa is that, for example, if you are a British citizen and you are needing a visa into Zimbabwe and you are going to go across to Zambia for a bit of an extension of a holiday and come back to Zimbabwe, if you paid double entry visa, you'd be paying more than the $50. So often it's just cheaper to buy the $50 visa and you can hop across the border as often as you like. It also includes day trips into Botswana from Zimbabwe. Okay, so moving on to Zimbabwe, we've just zoomed in a little bit. There are 3 major airports. I hope you can see my pointer over here. So we have Bulawayo down in the south of the country. We've got Harare, which is the capital. And we've got Victoria Falls, where I'm sitting currently at the moment, in a balmy 35 degrees Celsius on the northwestern boundary of Zambia and Botswana. On each side, you'll see some of the major airlines that do fly into the various airports. And so the connectivity to Zimbabwe has increased over the last 2 years. One of the main reasons for this is our brand new international airport that came online December of last year. So for any of you who had traveled to Zimbabwe before, if you look onto the left-hand side, the small white building, that used to be the only airport. We've created a much bigger airport, terminal, immigration, etc. that can take wide-body jets and a runway that's 3 kilometers long. So one of the easiest hubs to connect through is via Addis in Ethiopia, using Ethiopian Airlines. They fly into Victoria Falls. and connect to the rest of the world. All right, Zimbabwe is not just about flying in. It's often a nice destination for you to be able to drive and do a self-drive. So we do call it a world of wonders, and many of those wonders are only accessible at the moment via either private charter planes, which can take a lot of money out the pocket, or you can rent a car and do self-drive. Historically, there were a lot of police roadblocks, and the roads were always deemed as being unsafe to drive on. I'm glad to say in recent times, those roadblocks have disappeared, and it is now once again a pleasure to travel around Zimbabwe. Fuel is available at all the large towns and at even petrol stations in between. So for example, the Great Zimbabwe Ruins to the south of Harare, the best way to access them is by vehicle. So guests will often arrive into Harare and then they'll drive towards Victoria Falls, stopping along the way at the Great Zimbabwe Ruins, Matoba Hills, where Cecil Rhodes is buried, going past Hwange National Park, the largest national park in Zimbabwe, and then ending in Victoria Falls, and then catching a flight from there onwards to their country of origin. So in Zimbabwe, we cook a lot in open fires. We've got what we call a potjie pot, and it's what the traditional dish of sadza and nyama can be cooked in. And I like to liken this traditional pot at home to being what Zimbabwe stands for. So the three legs on the pot are what keeps Zimbabwe propped up and keeps the food from spoiling. So for example, the first leg can be its people, second leg is the culture and history that Zimbabwe has, and then the wildlife and diverse areas. So just touching on why Zimbabwe is a world of wonders and a great place, its people are always smiley and happy. No matter what has happened in Zimbabwe in recent times, there always seems to be a smile on people's faces and they're always welcoming the tourism industry. In terms of the culture and history, you need not look further than the Great Zimbabwe Ruins. Started in the 11th century and finished around the 15th century. This large area was presumed to be home to about 18,000 people and was seen as the capital in those days. So Bushman paintings galore if we go further south. And in terms of the diverse wildlife areas that you can visit, you've got the cliffs down in the south of Zimbabwe, and you can go to the Eastern Highlands where you would presume you're actually in Scotland or somewhere in Europe. We've got amazing lakes, so Lake Kariba, for example, where there's sailing as an option between the different lodges and islands, as well as renting houseboats that range from per cabin to your own luxury houseboat with a plunge pool. If we jump onto the Zambezi River around Mana Pools area, you've got the escarpment of Zambia as your backdrop and a plethora of animals around. I would say that the wildlife in Zimbabwe is what really brings its guests to the area. So ranging from the Big Five through the different national parks, there's something for everyone. It is a place you can get up close and personal with wildlife. And often people say, but hang on, in Zimbabwe, you can't really off-road in the national parks where other countries you can. It's not about off-roading and getting up close into the personal space of the animals, but rather respecting the pristine environment that we operate in. And getting these pictures, as you can see, is definitely close enough to getting to the animals. You don't need to invade their private space. Hwange National Park, in terms of animals, compared to some of our neighboring countries, has the greatest density and diversity of species. So animals such as sable, eland, and roan from the antelope species are readily available, as well as a diverse bird life. One thing that always stands out about Zimbabwe is that its guiding is second to none. And I would challenge anyone out there. A lot of guides that are working in other countries have originally started their training in Zimbabwe and then moved on. And one of these reasons is that to become a professional walking guide in Zimbabwe, you're looking at an average of about 5 years of training. So what guides do is they get their license at first, and then they do an apprenticeship of about 5 years working in the safari industry before they go for numerous and rigorous tests, both oral and practical, to be able to be classified as a professional guide, and that then entitles them to be able to walk guests. All right, so jumping ahead to the mighty Victoria Falls, which is on everyone's lips. Even if they haven't heard of the country of Zimbabwe, most people have heard of Victoria Falls. So why is Victoria Falls such a sought-after destination? Well, first and foremost, obviously the big sheet of water that falls there, part of the 7 natural wonders of the world, as well as being the adrenaline capital of the world. So just a quick explanation. The top picture is Victoria Falls, round about January, February time, when the rains have come, the rivers are full, the tributaries have flown into the Zambezi River, and you've got a thick waterfall happening. And then if you look below, taken from a similar angle, this is the drier time. So this would be plus minus right about now until the rains start to fall and the Zambezi River starts to pick up. I'm hoping everyone can see my little pointer, because we can see the Zimbabwe side of the Victoria Falls separated by the bridge, and then you've got the Zambian side, which you can see where the little heart of Zambia is. So the nice thing about being on the Zimbabwe side at this time is that where you can walk to see the falls, you're still getting a great sheet of water. This is because the river that separates Zimbabwe on the left, as you look at it, with Zambia on the right, the deepest part of the river at this time of year is actually closest to the Zimbabwe bank. So what this does is all the water then shifts over to that side, and you get a great cascade of waterfall no matter what time of the year you visit the Victoria Falls. As mentioned, it is the adrenaline capital, pardon me, of the world, and you've got activities that range from bungee jumping to whitewater rafting to more scenic, such as the helicopter trips as well as the sundowners. If we move on towards the nightlife and the food that's happening around Victoria Falls at the moment, we are getting more and more restaurants that are opening. So restaurants that are your traditional sadza and nyama on the side of the road, to hot dogs and pies, going up to more of the nightlife restaurants such as Pariah State, which opened up earlier this year, and the Three Monkeys, which is going to celebrate its 2nd anniversary. So I know a lot of people won't think of going to Victoria Falls because it's a foodie destination. These restaurants are really shaping the nightlife and what can be eaten around there. In terms of lodging and accommodations, Zimbabwe as a whole caters for everyone. You've got your backpacker style, sharing a room with other travelers, to your top of the range safari camps, all the way to the grand old lady herself of Victoria Falls Hotel, which I believe, stand to be corrected, is 114 years old this year. So that, ladies and gentlemen, to me is why Zimbabwe is a world of wonders. I know I've gone through the slides quite fast, but I was hoping to get into more of a question and answer and debate as to why Zimbabwe is an upcoming destination. To be 100% honest, Botswana and Namibia at the moment are selling themselves. Guests will approach travel agents and tour operators and would have seen a documentary or would have seen something in a travel journal and say, that is where I want to go. Zimbabwe at the moment is taking a little bit more effort to be sold, but what is happening is that there are still beds available. The rates are still cheaper than Namibia and Botswana in particular, and you are getting some of the best wildlife viewing with the best guiding, along with some of the best service and accommodation, and a smiling and happy people around a diverse and cultural area. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Graham. That was really interesting. I'm sure everyone agrees with me, and some amazing pictures too. So as I mentioned at the beginning, if anyone has any questions, please do type them into the question box. So the first one I've got is from Natalie, and she says, is there a way to go from Zambia to Zim, for example, by foot? And what is that bridge that was in the picture? Is that a border crossing?
100%. So that bridge in the picture is where they do the bungee jumping. So that is, there are other border posts, but the one that works the most and the best is from Zambia to Zimbabwe, and you can do it by foot. So what generally happens is you'll obviously go through customs and immigration. If you're starting in Zambia, you'll stamp your passport, you'll walk across the bridge, which is effectively no man's land, and then you'll get to the Zimbabwean side on the Zimbabwean mainland, stamp your passport, and then carry on walking. The walk between the two immigration posts is over 1.5 kilometers long. There are taxis that do operate in between. On that bridge is a railway as well as a footpath as well as a road. So it is quite an iconic area where you get an old steam train at times driving across with guests and visitors that are booked on dinners or just sightseeing, as well as the Zambian railways and Zimbabwean railways trains crossing over to do obviously import and export.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Natalie. She's asking, how would you rate Zim as a place to see wild dog?
Okay, so I would rate it as very good compared to our neighbors as well. So in terms of monopools, there's a very strong possibility that you'll see wild dog if you're spending 3 to 4 nights there, and the same in Hwange if you're spending 3 to 4 nights there. Never head to a place for one night and think you can tick everything off, especially with the wild dogs. Wild dogs are generally nomadic, so they'll have a den when they are denning and have a large territory to cover. So if they aren't denning, they're going to be covering a lot of territory to, first of all, to eat, to drink, and to mark their territory. When they are denning, they can be a little bit easier to find because they'll return in the morning and the afternoon to feed the pups that are there, as well as the dog that is looking after the pups. If any of you are familiar with, I believe it's BBC Earth or Planet Earth, they are doing a documentary at the moment called Dynasties. There's a great episode on wild dog there, and that was filmed in Monopools National Park. So something to look out for on Netflix as well as on cable.
I suppose leading on from that question where you say don't rush it, Natalie's also asking what circuits work best, say 10 days or so.
Okay, so depending what time of the year, because monopools, although some camps will be open all around, many of them do close. The reason they close is once the rains come in our rainy season. So just to note and to jot down, our rainy season will start around about now in November, and it'll go all the way through to April, beginning of April. In certain areas of monopools, because it's got a black cotton soil base, as soon as those rains come down, any Land Rover or any vehicles in those areas where they're operating will get stuck. So that makes it kind of difficult for large operators to get their supplies in, as well as once people are in, to be able to drive around an area. There are places that stay open because it's more of a developed road network. So you can visit monopools at all year round, but just to be aware that many of those lodges do close. So if you're looking at a 10-day circuit, I would say the peak time to visit Zimbabwe, although any time to visit is a great time, but the peak time if you wanted to be able to access all lodges and places would be from April all the way through to the beginning of November. 10 days works well because I would definitely do 2 days in Victoria Falls. You can do 3 days in Hwange and 3 days in Monopools. And then you can also head on to Harare to fly out of that way. If you're wanting to increase that 8-night safari to more of a 10-day, you can also visit Bulawayo and the Matopos and or the Great Zimbabwe Ruins. So 10 days you can definitely do. There's just so many variables that maybe we'll have to take us offline and chat a bit more about it, how to do it. But yeah, best time to visit, I would say, is between April and the end of October, when most lodges and operators are all running.
Thank you. A question from Manish. She's asking, at the moment, how does the tourism market in Zimbabwe compare to East Africa?
Okay, so if we are looking at a portion of what the GDP is, the tourism market is a massive in terms of employing people, and giving jobs. If you look at the unemployment in Zimbabwe, in 2003, it got to about 95%, which I know to most people is unbelievable, but the stats are there and they don't lie. And if you look at the unemployment at the moment, it can be as up to 80%, depending on which agency is running the census. So tourism, in terms of providing jobs, is massive. And in terms of the market, sorry, can you repeat the question? Is how big?
How does the tourism market compare to East Africa at the moment?
Okay, so East Africa, being Tanzania and those places, massive in bringing guests, I would say we are on an equal footing in being the same size as the market with guests wanting to travel. East Africa still, because of the migration, holds a big pull with most guests, especially first-time safari goers. Zimbabwe used to hold such a big pull because of the ties with Britain and Europe just post-independence, but it did dip a little bit, but it has resurged in the last 3 to 4 years.
And how is the wildlife reacting to the resurgence of tourism in the country? Is it still skittish?
Okay, so there was a huge perception that when Zimbabwe went through its hard times in 2000 and 2001, that wildlife was affected negatively. 100% honest, the wildlife probably prospered a little bit more because of having less people around. Hunting has always been part of Zimbabwe, and the hunting declined in those areas at the time, because no one was coming to Zimbabwe due to lack of fuel and just being able to get around from A to B. So wildlife has prospered massively. The wildlife is not skittish in Zimbabwe because there have always been national parks around where people have been visiting. When the international tourism dropped, the regional tourism also dropped a little bit, but we still had visitors from South Africa, Namibia, Zambia, etc., still coming to those parts. National parks was always still around, so the wildlife didn't dip in terms of being skittish to now suddenly having people arriving. It's always been there and prospered. What does happen now is that by having more lodge operators around, or taking back the areas where they had just gone on hiatus for a little bit, it has decreased the potential for poaching. So just by having people on the ground and running their day-to-day operations means that people who are coming in to do bushmeat poaching to get something for the pot rather than ivory and rhino horn, now they're not going to be able to do it because there are guides driving around, there are guests driving around. So wildlife has prospered and is increasing.
Okay, and then you've already answered the question about when the best time to visit is, but Hope is also asking, is Mana Pools still open to do canoeing?
Mana Pools is open to do canoeing. There are different canoe companies that operate there. So you can do what some people do. They'll stay in more of an upmarket lodge, and then they'll book a canoeing safari from there as well. So you arrive into Zimbabwe, you've got a nice lodge, your food and everything's there waiting for you. You spend 1 or 2 nights, and then you'll do the Mana Pools canoe trail, for example, for 2 or 3 nights, depending how long you want to spend it. And then either head out from there afterwards, or you can then spend it at another fixed camp, just so you're getting a little bit more of luxury before you carry on with your trip.
I'm just going to quickly interject here because I've got a lot of questions to get through and I know we're going to run out of time. So if you have any further questions, if you could just email them to me at the end, I will leave my address for you and I will direct them to Graham. But just continuing now, back to the questions. So I've got one from Geordie, which says, with the rebirth of tourism in the country, are there new accommodation options opening in Harare?
There are. So in terms of the original accommodations, you've got the big hotels like Nichols, for example, that have always been around, but you're getting a lot of bed and breakfasts that are opening at the moment. So as tourism is a lure to people, they are starting to open their homes to others. Not like an Airbnb, although Airbnb is prominent. These bed and breakfasts are really well looked after. They're in lush green gardens because of the altitude and the rainfall that Harare gets. So there are numerous options available at the moment.
And what is it like traveling in October? Is it a very hot month or is it sort of okay?
Okay, so October is a very hot month. So if you're looking in terms of Celsius, you are going anything from 30 degrees Celsius all the way up to 45 degrees Celsius. Now, I know that would mean a lot of people are not going to come. What it does do, if you look at a place like Hwange National Park to start off, Hwange National Park has got pumped water holes because in 1920s when there was growth and people were heading out to try and do farming, Hwange was earmarked for farming. But it turned out to be such terrible land for farming and for people to live that they reverted it to a national park and game park. So they had to pump water to keep the animals there because the animals used to migrate to the north and to other areas for rivers, but obviously with railroads and human settlements coming in, it was starting to cut off the migratory routes. So the pumped water holes mean that our rainy season ends around April. So April, May, June, July, August, September, no rain has fallen. So the food is quite scarce, but animals can last longer without food. They need water. So they have to go to these pumped water holes at least once a day to drink, which means you're getting a dust density and drama of animals coming in. The predators know where the prey species are heading to, so they also hang around the water holes, and you're seeing an interaction between, say, buffalo and lion on a daily basis, as well as elephant and lion on a daily basis. So whilst it's a hot month to come to, it really is a good time to come and get pictures, as well as see predator versus prey. If you move on to Mana Pools, for example, it is also a dry month, but because the Zambezi River is ever flowing, a lot of the animals will move from the central areas of Mana Pools National Park all the way up to the actual river to drink once a day. So once again, you're just getting a concentrated area of animals, be they predator or prey, and it is the best months, October, November, even September, the best months to see predator and prey interaction around Zimbabwe.
A question from Tess. She's asking, how does Hwange compare with Kruger National Park?
Okay, so Hwange, similar to the Kruger National Park, you have got public areas of the park where you can get day trippers and people driving around. So that can be a little bit frustrating in terms of a bit of traffic, but it's not nearly as much visited as the Kruger National Park. To be 100% honest, a lot of South African guests won't go to Kruger Park because they feel it can be over visited, so they head up to Hwange where there's less traffic. You've got the private concessions as well. Numerous operators holding them, where you can be in a private concession and you won't see anyone else. So, for example, if I just touch on Wilderness's private concessions in the southeast, you'll only ever see another Wilderness Safaris vehicle there, and those vehicles are all equipped with radios, so they will never send more than 3 vehicles to a sighting. So you'll be sitting at a lion sighting or a leopard sighting or a wild dog sighting, and you'll only ever see 2 other vehicles plus yours there. In saying that, even in the public parts of the park, it's still not crowded. In terms of diversity, the Kruger Park will have more of a mountainous area in certain places, whereas Hwange is more of a floodplain area. So it's a completely different look and feel to it, it's probably best if you jump onto Wikipedia, or if you send me your email, we can chat a bit more about it and the differences. And I feel that even in the public parts of the park, you'll see more animals than what you'll see in Kruger. Now, I know I'll get some Kruger-loving people shouting at me afterwards, but I'll challenge them with statistics later.
Okay, a question from Manish. Aside from Vic Falls, what do you think is the most famous thing to do in Zimbabwe? So obviously Kenya has the Great Migration, Uganda has gorilla trekking. Is there anything else that you think makes Zimbabwe stand apart?
So definitely more towards a cultural aspect. I would say Victoria Falls is generally a stop on everyone's map, even if they're not thinking they're visiting Zimbabwe. They always stop at Victoria Falls because it's a hub for access into the safari areas of Botswana, Namibia, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. But definitely, visiting the Great Zimbabwe Ruins should be on everyone's bucket list, just to go and get a bit of a cultural experience and see how advanced civilization was in between the 11th and the 15th century there. As well as visiting the Matopos Hills. The Matopos Hills have got the largest, I believe, density of leopard. Not that you'll go there and see leopard all over, but because of the topography of the hills and the food source around, it really is an amazing place to visit, and hosts the largest density of leopard. As well as hosting some really great Bushman paintings from years gone by, and Cecil Rhodes's grave is a cultural place. But after Victoria Falls and those, I would say that definitely Hwange National Park is one of the most sought after places to visit in Zimbabwe, because it's driving distance from Victoria Falls, or a short flight from Victoria Falls. It really is easy access and can be visited 365 days of the year.
Sherry has asked, or stated rather, she would love to hear about prospects from Eastern Highlands, Gonorizu and Kariba, etc. Could you just give a quick overview on that?
Okay, so I think that was any developments of what is happening around there. So if we touch on the Eastern Highlands, at the moment there are a few places around there that are operating in terms of lodgings. There's also a place called Aberfoyle, which is great. You don't go to the Eastern Highlands to tick off large game. You don't have large game there, but it's more of a birding as well as a scenery place, and totally different to the rest of the feel of Zimbabwe because it's quite elevated on the Mozambican border. As mentioned earlier, you can be, if I transport you now to the Eastern Highlands and say, where are you? You'll probably name some place in Europe because it's a lot cooler and just lush and green. If we move on to Gonorizu National Park, which means a place of elephants, the Frankfurt Zoological Society have been doing great things in that national park down there in terms of anti-poaching, in terms of community and culture outreach, and you have got some great places. You've got Singita's Pamashana, which is just outside of the park, but still I classify it in the same area of the southeast of Zimbabwe. And you also are able to visit Chilo Gorge, for example, which overlooks the park and then drives into the park. There is some great walking and mobile safari options as well down there. And to think about it, it's probably the hidden gem of Zimbabwe at the moment. Not a lot of people are heading down there, mainly because of access at the moment. It's actually easier to access Gonorizu National Park from South Africa, going through the border post down there, rather than coming from Victoria Falls, the main visited place in Zimbabwe. Access is still easy though from Vic Falls and Harare. It just takes a good ground handler to connect you using flights, either scheduled or charter, or the road network is possible with the rental car. Then if we jump to Lake Kariba, one of my personal favorites, Lake Kariba has got a lot of history, being used to be the largest man-made lake, hosts great fishing as well as game viewing along the shores. And historically, houseboats used to be the big thing that people would go to. So you'd rent a houseboat, be it a private houseboat with friends and family, or just jumping onto a deck with other people and meet along the way, and then you'd cruise around the lake for however many days you wanted. The houseboat industry did take a bit of a hit when the fuel crisis hit Zimbabwe in the early 2000s, but it has resurrected its head now with more and more boats coming active once again, and newer and more modern style boats. So now you're getting air conditioning on it, you're getting electricity 24/7, etc., and some great fishing as well. The park is always, the Lake Kariba, pardon me, National Park, there has always had some great fishing. Along the shoreline, Matusudana National Park, you get some great lodges as well. So it's not just about being in the middle of the lake and docking at night, and you can visit the shoreline lodges as well.
Okay, next one is Nicholas Wright says, you mentioned walking safaris and how good the guides are. I know some companies do amazing Mana Pools walking safaris. Are these experiences comparable to, say, South Luangwa walking safari? And would you say this is, I think you've already answered this question, another primary experience selling point other than Vic Falls?
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Nick. So walking safaris originated in Zambia. So they always hold that high, which is great. And then from there, obviously, it started to develop in other countries. I would say South Luangwa is a unique area to walk in, as much as Mana Pools is also a unique area to walk in. So I would put them on equal footing. I know my Zambian cousins and relatives are going to shout at me for that one, but you have to really go and experience and dive into it a little bit more to see what the differences are. So, for example, in Mana Pools, when you walk in there, you've got amazing alberta forests. You've got these really large bull elephants that are, I'm not going to use the word habituated because that might give a false sense, but if you find a bull elephant, you can walk generally very close with them and just be in the presence of their of this great animal. You can come walk on foot up to wild dog. You can see leopard, you can see cheetah. Obviously, when those see you, they run away. But in terms of being on foot and seeing wild dog, it is another great experience. And Mana Pools National Park is still one of those places that gives a lot of people the heebie-jeebies, because you can technically go there and go on your own walking safari without having too much experience. Obviously, we always push that you should have a professional guide with you when you're in the national park itself. When you're in private concessions, you will always have a professional walking safari guide with you. But a lot of self-drive people would drive there and then they'll walk around the river edge, for example, on their own. And it just gives a sense of freedom. And yeah, it is unique in its way, as much as South Luangwa is also unique in the diverse areas that they walk in there.
Okay, we've got Natalie asking a fun fact question. Does Hwange mean anything in the local language?
Okay, I'm going to correct your spelling there, Natalie. So Hwange is H-W-A-N. Okay, I've lost it, but yeah, H-W-A-N-E, A-N-G-E. And what Hwange does mean, it was named after a chief, and Nwanza chief. So it used to be called Hwange, and then afterwards changed its name to Hwange National Park, and is the largest national park. Just over 14,500 square kilometers.
I've also been pronouncing it wrong. Can you cross the border? Can you cross the border from Lake Kariba to the lower Zambezi in Zambia easily? That's from Charlotte Wells.
Okay, Charlotte, are you talking legally or illegally? Legally, yes, you can. Illegally, no, you shouldn't be doing it. So indeed, Lake Kariba is just a span of water that is in between, and there are different border posts that you can use to cross. So, for example, Chirundu border post is at the edge of Lake Kariba, just down the Zambezi a little bit, and that's the most common border crossing. So that is the border crossing we use when you are going from Zambia to Kariba or Kariba to Zambia, particularly if you're going to lower Zambezi to Kariba or lower Zambezi in Zambia to Mana Pools National Park. Chirundu is the border crossing that we do use. It is used by trucks and local Zambians and local Zimbabweans doing trade and crossing over, but it is a fast point of access for tourists. Tourists are given preferential right of way when they are crossing, be it in their own vehicles or be it with a tour operator or travel agent. So very easy, yes.
Okay, Manish is asking, can you see the Big Five in Zimbabwe? And if so, can you see it from one place, or do you have to go to multiple different places?
Okay, Manish, so Big Five in Zimbabwe. We do have the Big Five in Zimbabwe. If you were to go to the national parks, you would not see the Big Five. The only animal that would be missing, sadly, are our rhino friends. So Hwange National Park does house rhinos. They do have them, but you can probably count the number of rhinos in that 14,500 square kilometer national park on two hands. Even the guys that are tracking the rhinos and doing the research and looking after them sometimes won't see them for weeks on end. They'll just know they are still around because of the tracks. It's a sad state because Hwange used to, 10 years ago, used to have plenty rhino where you could bump into them. They're actually a nuisance on walking safari, particularly the black rhino, because they would charge all the time. Now are sadly not seen due to a poaching epidemic that swept through Zimbabwe. So the rhino that are able to be seen now, you can see some in the Matopos National Park, but then you're not going to be seeing too many lion, cheetah, etc. that are a wild dog over there. So to tick off the Big Five, you would have to move around. I would say Hwange National Park and Matopos, you'd be able to tick off the Big Five, or Matopos and Mana Pools National Park to tick off the Big Five.
Okay, we've just got a couple more questions. So one from Sam. What companies are available to take tourists to the Great Zimbabwe?
So if you use a ground handler in Zimbabwe, you can do it. Most people that are visiting the Great Zimbabwe Ruins are doing it with a self-drive. So what you could do is you could book a car through a ground handler, and they would obviously give you directions, etc., and a reliable rental car service. And then once you get to the Great Zimbabwe Ruins, there are guides that are hireable, I think starting from about $5 a day outside. It is always recommended to take a guide with, because even though you can still enjoy the sights, it's better to have one of the local guides there that have studied the area, come from the area, just to impart a little bit more knowledge. And I'm sure most of you, or all of you, will agree that $5 starting is not a lot to spend. So 100% majority of people that do visit that area are stopping in a self-drive. You are able to get a guided driver that can pick you up from Harare, booked through most of the ground handlers, and they will drive you to the area itself and then onwards if people are a bit hesitant about driving in Zimbabwe. We do drive on the left-hand side of the road, so sometimes that can be the biggest detriment to people who are used to driving on the right-hand side of the road.
Okay, the last question is from Geordie, and it says, what can you tell us about the new Greater Mana concession in terms of like expectations, comparison to Mana Pools, etc.?
Okay, I'm not following the new Greater Mana concession.
That's what it says. Geordie, if you're still there, could you clarify?
Type a little bit into it. I'm going to start trying to answer it with what I'm perceiving to be what it is. So what's happened is Mana Pools was always a national park, and it was flanked with hunting concessions. What's happening now is non-consumptive tourism, which is photographic tourism and ecotourism. Companies like, for example, African bush camps, wilderness safaris, Great Plains, etc., have started to tender and successfully win those concessions on the edge of the national park. So, for example, Rakomachi concession, which was being held by Wilderness, is a buffer zone before entering the national park. If we're starting from Chirundu and we're going down the Zambezi, then you'd have Mana Pools itself, long shoreline, huge park, and then there were hunting concessions. So in recent times, Wilderness Safaris has just taken over Chikwenya, which is now turned into non-consumptive once again, and is bordered by Sapi, which Great Plains have successfully tendered and won. So they are taking over that as a non-consumptive as well. So I'm guesstimating that perhaps that's what is meant by a Greater Mana Pools. And then on the opposite side of the river, we've also got Lower Zambezi National Park. So Zambia are protecting the animals from a non-consumptive point of view, and Zimbabwe are protecting the animals from a non-consumptive point of view by expanding with private concessions that are adjacent to the national park and just making a much larger unfenced area for animals to prosper.
Thanks, Graham. I think that's the end of the questions for now. And if anyone has any further questions, I will be emailing you a recording of this webinar this afternoon, and I'll include Graham's email on that. Alternatively, you can email them to me and I will pass them on to Graham. Otherwise, Graham, thank you very much. Everyone, thank you so much for attending, and hopefully tourism does continue to pick up in Zimbabwe.
Thanks very much, Sally, and everyone at Atta, and thanks everyone for logging into this webinar, and hopefully I've been a little bit of a help. Please do feel free to send through the questions you've got or any questions that may arise down the future. Zimbabwe definitely is a place to come and visit. And yeah, the tagline, A World of Wonders, encompasses everything that Zimbabwe has to offer to you and your guests.